Hi, this is Shannon Tidwell, Garden Girl at 2 Peas in a Bucket. Welcome back to another Memory Keeping Monday. This month, one of our theme prompts is to use a die cutting machine, so I'm going to put my silhouette to work. I know everyone is getting into the Christmas and holiday spirit, but I decided that I wanted to kind of take a step back and scrapbook some artwork that my daughter brought home from school before it got smashed up and ruined. It was just too cute to not include into her scrapbook, so that's what I'm going to do. You can see that this artwork is definitely going to take center stage on the layout. I am not going to have to add a whole lot to it because it's so bright and colorful. I knew that I wanted to start with a neutral background, so I've just got kind of a light patterned paper as my background, and I always find those are great starting points. That way you're not starting with a complete blank slate, but it's neutral enough to add a lot of different pattern papers too. And then I just kind of went through my stash and found some pattern papers that I thought would work so that I had an easy stack to grab from. And now it's time to start thinking about my photo placement, where I want this headband to go across the page, and then to figure out what other pattern paper I'd like to use on the bottom. And as you'll see, I go through several different options. I've kind of decided where I want the photos and the headband to be placed, but I would like a different pattern paper there at the bottom. And so I just kind of went through that stack that I had grabbed until I find something that I think will work. And I think I'm going to stick with this pink wood grain. I really like how it adds a splash of color with still being neutral and matching the background. And there's going to be a lot going on it down there, so not too much of it's going to show, but we'll have just a little bit of color peeking out from behind. And pink is always good in my daughter's book. I find that when I do work with light colored or neutral backgrounds, that I usually like to have a strip of either a darker or maybe a striped pattern paper along the bottom and even the top. So I just kind of cut a little skinny strip and then I'll stitch it on later. I'm feeling good about how I've got everything laid out here so far. And I'm going to go ahead and adhere it down. Even though I don't have the rest of the page planned, sometimes this just helps things flow when I make a commitment and just start going with it. And then I'll work in the rest of the design around what I've got here adhered as the base. When I use two photos that are of the same size, I generally like to adhere them just a little askew, one a little higher than the other. You'll also notice that they're not centered, and I've done that on purpose. While I was doing all that, my silhouette was busy working on the first batch of feathers. You can see here that I have used just a yellow, kind of a golden yellow and white striped pattern paper. It is a double-sided paper, which I find is really great when you're working with your silhouette on shapes like this, because you actually get 2 for 1. You can just flip it over and get some polka dots on the other side if you decide to. And a note about my silhouette mat, I just spray it with a spray adhesive to keep it sticky, and I've been using it for years. So while my silhouette is busy cutting another batch of feathers, I'm going to do a little more work on the bottom of the layout here. I'm going to stack together a couple cards. The first grid pattern paper you see back there is actually packaging from an Amy Tangerine product. I love that orange grid. It's a nice thick cardstock. And so I've just added a little bit of stitching on it and then added in a die cut as well. And now I've decided I'm going to use that today card for my journaling. And you can see that I put one of the feathers on it and stitched it on and did a little detail stitching around it. So now I've got my feathers cut out, and you can see that I've also got a red and white polka dot added. So I found that it's easiest to work with the feathers in groupings. So I kind of grouped them together, adhered them or stitched them together, and then stuck them into the layout. And that kind of made it a little bit easier instead of working with each individual feather. I'm also starting to add a little bit more stitching as we go. You can see that I've now stitched on that strip there at the bottom. And then I've got these little feathers, these 3 little ones together, and I've went ahead and just kind of stitched those together. I'm going to place those by the title. And then I've got some medium-sized one that I've also stitched together just to hold them together. And then I'm going to tuck them in back behind the headband as well. So now I've added the strip across the top to match the one at the bottom. And I also wanted to add that you'll see on that big pink feather that there's a little tear in it that happened when I was pulling it off the silhouette sheet. So I'll figure out a way to cover that up as we go. Now I've got that big area up there in the left top corner that kind of needs something. I'm kind of feathered out, don't feel like I need any more feathers on the page, so I'm going to look at adding some labels. And here I've got these cute labels by Evalicious. I'm going to add one from there. It's got a nice black and white stripe on it. And then in my book, you can never go wrong with a little bit of red. So I'm going to add this red long label by Elle's Studio. And now I've got these fun little badges by Evalicious. I really love how they come on little tabs that you can pull apart. The backing pulls apart, so that way you can figure out where you want them on the page without having to make that commitment of pulling it off. As you can see at this point, the main design of the layout is complete. Right now I'm just concentrating on adding those little final details to the layout. I've added the arrow and the star up at the top on top of my labels. I've added another tag to the layering behind my title tags. I think all these little things are just what makes the layout complete. Now I'm going to start on the journaling. On these tags, I'm just going to write the little details about the day and what it was. And then I've got my whole journaling card that I made earlier that I can fill in the rest of the details about the day or just what I was feeling by looking at these photos. And that pretty much completes the layout. I almost forgot to cover up that little tear on the pink feather at the top. And I just had an extra pink feather that I had already cut and I layered it right on top of the first one to cover it up. And that way I'm not adding too much more to the page, but it still covers up the little mistake that I had. I ended up cutting quite a few feathers for this layout and only using a small amount of them, but that's okay because now I've got a little stash of die cuts that I can go to when I'm working on other layouts. I think my favorite part of this layout is actually this journaling card. I'm going to remember that for later, adding just little bits of detail like this to a journaling card. So even though my daughter might be a little upset that I smashed, as she said, her headband, I think it looks really cute on this layout, and I'm glad that we'll have it for years to come instead of it getting eaten by the dog. I hope that you guys will join me this week in the challenge of using your die cutting machine, and I'm also throwing in using some artwork on your page. As always, I've had a great time making this layout for you guys for Memory Keeping Monday. I hope that you've enjoyed the layout in video and will join in on the challenge. I'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.